Today, Ian and Jessi begin a two-part build that'll turn this stock diesel pickup into a Baja contender. Plus, the Score Desert Series isn't all about trophy trucks. We'll check out the Truggies. Xtreme 4x4 starts now.
Welcome to Xtreme 4x4. Now, when you tell someone you own a truck, you normally have to qualify it. Is it a two-wheel drive or a four-wheel drive? Are you a mall cruiser or a hardcore trail guy? But either way, you usually end up as part of a group.
And those groups are pretty solid. If you're into power, you tend to be a big displacement, gas engine kind of guy. And if you're into towing and torque, you typically end up being a diesel guy. Now, what if I tell you that we could get 500 horse and 1,000 foot-pounds of torque out of a diesel?
And then turn that thing into a West Coast style Baja truck that's so reliable you could actually drive it to the race, compete in the race, and then drive the truck home. It was actually done.
This is the Banks Sidewinder development truck, which raced in the Baja 1000. Drove to the race, competed, and then drove home. No trailer, no nothing. And in its first year, it finished third in the stock full class.
And we're gonna build that same truck today here at Xtreme.
We're gonna start with this 2005 Dodge Cummins turbo diesel. Then we are going to add the Banks big horsepower system, a variable geometry turbo, some electronic goodies, and a new torque converter.
Everything we installed today is available from Banks. Gail Banks is also planning to start building turnkey trucks like this prototype with this package on them to make them the ultimate in diesel dual-purpose truck, called the Sidewinder All-Terrain.
That's a pretty killer truck. And we're gonna turn this truck into that truck?
Yes, but in red. And the first thing I have to do is pull this transmission out, so can you help me wrestle this transfer case down?
Sorry, I'm still on night duty.
Give me your gloves, son.
Orders.
We thought this would happen, so I made sure somebody was around to help out with the heavy work.
Hey Ian, how's it going?
It's going all right. There's your gloves. No free rides here at Xtreme.
All right.
Everyone's a worker.
All right, let's do this. Okay, we're gonna go up.
Yep. Perfect. Perfect. Thanks, Gail.
Thanks for doing my job for me.
Oh, no problem.
Now, what is it that led you into diesel performance in the first place?
Well, I've been turbocharging for 46 years, but back in '82, I got this land speed record project with Pontiac, and they gave me a couple of GMC dually pickups with diesels in them. There wasn't enough power. They needed airflow, so I turbocharged them.
And that's what leads us into this package here.
Yeah, this is primarily an airflow package. It's intended to reduce restriction on the intake side with this ram air setup. Then we amp up the turbocharger and get more boost out of it to give us more airflow. Once we've got that, we run it through low restriction ducting in this inlet piece, and this huge intercooler, which reduces the air temperature, gives you more oxygen into the engine. On the exhaust side, we run a 4-inch dual exhaust, and that takes it out to the world. When we're done, we've got about a 30 to 40% horsepower advantage at the same exhaust gas temperature as with the tuner alone. That gives us 500 horsepower and 1,000 pound-feet of torque in this truck.
With all the power we're going to get in that kit, we're going to go ahead and replace this torque converter. You can see Dodge welds these little feet on the converter housing to mount it to the flywheel, and with all that power in the engine, you can actually bend those feet over and distress this plate, causing premature clutch failure or even converter failure. Now, Banks has that figured out by building a completely billet housing and machining the mounting holes into the plate. Now, inside that housing, you're going to find a multiple disc clutch setup, which is ideal for this situation because when you're building a lot of power in an engine, the clutch can actually slip at a certain horsepower. All we got to do is slip it in. This is a great upgrade for any Dodge truck that sees serious duty.
With the transmission reinstalled, we'll remove the factory exhaust before starting under the hood.
Now I'm going to pull the exhaust manifold and the factory turbo. That cool Sidewinder all-terrain pickup truck we saw earlier is going to come in Ford, Chevy, and Dodge variations. The Ford and Chevy come from the factory with a variable geometry turbo. The Dodge doesn't. So we're going to pull this factory turbo off and replace it with a VG turbo that's made by Gale Banks. Now, you may ask yourself, what is a VG turbo? And who better to explain it to you than the guy who built the one going on this truck?
So Gale, would you start off by telling us exactly how a turbo works?
Well, the exhaust gas leaving the engine enters this exhaust manifold. It takes all the exhaust to a common point, and there you mount the turbine part of the turbocharger. Exhaust gas enters the turbine, turns a turbine wheel, and leaves and goes out to the world through the outlet. On a common shaft is a compressor, and the compressor wheel draws air in through the air cleaner, pressurizes it, and sends it off to the engine. So that's essentially how the turbocharger works.
Now I understand that there's something different about this particular model, right?
Yeah, this is a Banks-Garrett hybrid turbo. This is a prototype. This whole thing is a prototype. Essentially, the Garrett section in the middle controls a set of vanes that change the velocity going into the turbine wheel of the exhaust gas. Much like squeezing down a garden hose, you don't have any more water flow, but the velocity goes up coming out. So the same thing happens in here. At low speeds, where a big 500 horse capable turbo like this would be sluggish, this one, by changing the velocity, it just comes out of the hole like you can't believe. So that's essentially what the variable geometry section is all about.
Now how do you control its drive? Because that's what's good about this, right?
Yeah, well, this is controlled by a microprocessor, which is in this turbo controller, what we call the shapeshifter turbo control. And it picks up signals from our speed loader engine management system that tell it the speed of the engine, the position of the throttle, and also the boost. Based on that information, we make a determination of how to move these vanes inside to vary the velocity and consequently the amount of boost versus engine speed. So if you go down on the pedal real fast, it closes up real fast and speeds it up.
So there is no turbo lag?
There's virtually no turbo lag. You have never felt a Cummins come out of the hole like it will with this.
It's a dream come true.
Sure is.
Up next, half truck, half buggy, and fully capable of 130 in the desert. We'll meet Wayne Lugo and his Truggy when Xtreme 4x4 continues.
Welcome back to Xtreme. When it comes to desert racing, SCORE International is one of the world's premier off-road series.
And with classes ranging from pro trucks to VWs, sport utes, and even full-size stock like our Sidewinder, any enthusiast can get in on the action.
While the main event at the SCORE Laughlin Desert Challenge are $1 million trophy trucks, they're not the only ones kicking up some desert dust.
Anyone that wants to come out and build a vehicle, we have a class for it. You know, I don't know any other form of motorsports that you could do this. And this is racing. I mean, this is all the fun a guy could have in a lifetime. This is an E-ride.
With no restrictions, the Class 1 Unlimiteds are SCORE Racing's fantasy come true class, where Wayne Lugo can rip it up.
It's the thrill of chasing down people, it's the thrill of the driving, it's the thrill of the speed, and it's just a thrill of survival.
Do you think we frosted his ass?
We're talking about 130 miles an hour over dirt. It takes some real cojones to get out there and do what these guys do.
Wayne's doing it from the cockpit of his Banks Power Truggy.
We took a truck, all the technology of a truck, but we skinned it like a buggy. You take a truck and a buggy, you slam the two words together, hence you get a truggy. Everything here is a one-off piece of equipment. Motors in the front, it's a 447 cubic inch Ford V8, 800 horsepower, 700 foot-pounds of torque. Red line's at about 7,400 RPM.
It's pretty impressive when you can sit in this seat and be able to put the hammer down for that kind of speed.
It always wants to get out of control. I mean, the horsepower is your friend because you can drive through problems, but horsepower is your worst enemy because it puts you right into every problem too. And that's the whole rush right there. Just slamming the gear, just boom, and just standing on it.
To win, he's got to stand on it for 2 44-mile races.
When the green flag drops, you've got to focus on one thing. It's gas and braking and shifting. And how fast can I get into that turn? Where's my braking point? Where do I gas? And how fast can I accelerate?
With all that power, Wayne's Truggy needs the suspension to handle it.
Oh, I tell you, what does it mean? Are these holes getting big? Oh. Oh.
If you go back, the old school, when they didn't have the shock technology, they didn't have the travel, you had to drive through the bumps. And when you're driving through the bump, it's slower. The fastest way is over the top of the bump. Wheel travel, that's what this sport's all about. This right here, that's 28 inches of travel all the way drooped out. So when we're going over the bumps, we're coming off the jumps, that suspension's falling. And the whole point is how fast can it fall to touch the ground, because the more time the wheel has contact with the ground, the faster we can drive it. And so when it's down on the ground level, you notice the control arms are flat to slightly up, and this is when it's fully drooped out. Same thing for the rear end. It runs about 32 inches of rear travel. For us, it was a very safe number. The U-joints are never in a position where they'll pinch or bind, and it gives the truck lots of time when you're skipping over the whoops, the rear end just falls. Axles, big 44 spline axles, 10-inch ring and pinion gears, all the biggest stuff that they can make. It's all special built. You don't go in your normal parts shop and buy them. I mean, even from brakes, all CNC brakes, 4-piston brakes, 17-inch rotors. I mean, everything on here is big. If you're gonna build a vehicle like this, it's gonna be $250,000. I tell you, the cheapest part was to build it. To maintain it, well, that's a whole nother story.
After all that preparation, it comes down to race day.
He'll do good, and he'll have fun. That's the most important thing. He'll have fun. So whatever happens.
In both races, Mother Nature proved tougher than Wayne Lugo's Truggy.
Oh, we got a flat. I know we got a flat.
Caught a lot of guys, passed a lot of guys, but as fast as I could pass them, I was stuck with flat tires, so that they turned around and passed me. Finally, at the end of the day, I got 2 flats simultaneously. We only carry 1 spare tire, so I had to drive in on a flat tire. But we had a great weekend. We were really happy. The truck performed more to our expectations today, and we'll just regroup the guys and get ready to do it again.
Suppose you could say that Gale Banks is all about racing, whether it's land speed records or desert racing, huh?
And then he takes all the information he gets off that racetrack and puts it into those power systems that he puts on the street.
Check back after the break, because we're going to be installing the turbo.
Got an idea for the show? Drop us a line at Xtreme4x4TV.com.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4. That Dodge that you saw running through a California basin is the same Dodge that went to the Baja 1000, took 3rd in its class, and drove home. Well, today we're building our own version of that Sidewinder all-terrain. This is no mall cruiser. This is a high-performance machine that is just as happy off the road as it is on the road.
Now we've already replaced the torque converter, pulled the exhaust, the factory manifold, and the turbo. Now we're going to start installing the Big Hoss kit. The first thing to go in is a new intercooler. We're going to twist this AC condenser out of the way so the system stays closed. Wait till you see the difference between the stock piece and the new one from Banks. You can tell just by looking at these that the new one is going to flow a lot more air than the stock one. And if you look at the core, you can tell that it's going to cool that air even more. And that's the secret to the Banks kit. Flow a lot of air, cool it to keep it dense, and match it to the fuel. That's going to give you an acceptable exhaust gas temperature and a whole lot of power.
After the new intercooler, I'll remove the factory air inlet. Install the new gaskets on both sides of the heater housing. Position the Banks high ram into place on the intake. Install the new studs and slip in the new boost tube.
With the new manifold bolted up to the block, we're ready to slip in that VG turbo. Now tolerances in here are pretty tight because that new turbo body is a lot larger than the stock unit. Jessi's going to show you the difference. you can see that the exhaust inlet portion of the stock turbo is a lot smaller than the new turbo we got from Banks. That's going to cause clearance issues with the block. But the guys at Banks thought ahead, put a lot of engineering into this package. If you put these two Allen bolts, as per their instructions, underneath the exhaust manifold in place of the hex bolts you put on the top side, you'll gain 3 millimeters of clearance for that turbo to fit. That's how tight these things fit in. After the turbo is bolted to the new exhaust manifold, install the oil feed line, and then put in the boost tube.
All right, now the last thing to be installed under the hood is this Banks Shapeshifter Turbo Controller. This little guy will be working hand in hand with our 6-gun tuner that we'll be installing later to control the airflow through the turbo. Now this is programmed at Banks to adjust the vanes inside the variable geometry turbo to give us optimum boost through our entire RPM cycle. First, mount the controller to the fuse box lid. Hook up the ground wire, and the power wire is fed from the fuse box. This set of wires will go through an existing hole in the firewall to connect with our 6-gun tuner. The remaining wires go straight to the turbo. We'll wrap up the engine compartment install with the airbox.
For more information on anything you've seen today, check us out online, Xtreme4x4TV.com.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4. Money in the Banks is coming along ever so smoothly. All we have to do is a couple more things, but right now it's time for us to get this huge exhaust on.
We will pre-fit all the exhaust components, reuse the factory catalytic converter, and once the tailpipes are at a good height, we will tighten everything down.
The heart of this massive 4-inch exhaust is this monster muffler. I mean, we just put on a gigantic turbo, so we need to open up the exhaust to let this baby breathe. Now we can lower down, get inside, and put on that 6-gun tuner.
With the truck out from in the hoist, we can get into the cab and start dealing with the electrical. Now we're going to be installing a Banks 6-gun tuner. Now the 6-gun tuner registers input from the engine sensors. The manifold absolute pressure sensor, the fuel rail pressure sensor, the camshaft and crankshaft position sensor, and the torque converter clutch solenoid. This will take all the information from those sensors and produce new fuel and timing maps for the diesel engine. It'll also communicate with the Shapeshifter turbo controller that Jessi installed earlier to control that VG turbo. The Shapeshifter turbo requires some modifications to the 6-gun tuner. Install the T-tap into the 6-gun wiring harness, then secure the box under the dash, and plug in all the connectors.
That about wraps up the power portion of our Sidewinder project.
You may have noticed I didn't install the 6-position selector switch for that 6-gun, and that's because we have a super cool way to adjust the power output from this gun.
And then we get to be dealing with wheels and tires, suspension, and then we get to take it out and play.
But all that's next week, so we'll see you then.